So the Rambam asks, how many candles do you light on Hanukkah? This is Hilchos Hanukkah. It's after what we learned, Hilchos Tefillah. I could point to you there. It's on page 11 of 21. Rambam says, how many candles do you light? He gives the idea, Ner Yishuveso, which means one candle per household. Kol Bayis Uvayis Malik Ner Echad. Not even candle. Candle's in the wrong translation. A lamp. Okay? A decorative lamp. He's saying it's burning some sort of fuel outside the house to show this house celebrates Hanukkah. A lamp. It's not there for lighting. One lamp per household, whether or not it's a lot of people in the house or just one person. That's the basic commandment. Malik they wrote Kiminyan on Shebayis. Ner L'chol Echad V'Echad Bein Anashim Bein Nashim. You want to be, go beyond the strict letter of the law. Mechader means in the right way. One candle per person in the house. So there are 3 people in this house. 3 lamps outside the house every single night. By the way, night 1, 3 lamps. Night 2, 3 lamps. These are distinguished and they're not there for light. And then he brings, not now, sorry, over here, brings another opinion. V'amader yoter al zeh v'oseh mitzvah min hamukar madlik ner l'chol echad ve'echad b'layla rishon u'mosif olech l'chol layla v'layla echad. He has as many candles on the first night as people in the house, and the next night he lights a second candle for each of those people. Ketzad, the Rambam says, Harei shahiyu anshe habayit asara. 10 people in the house. B'layla rishon madlik asara neirot. So the first night he lights 10 lamps outside the house. U'v'leil sheni esrim. The second night 20. U'v'leil shlishi shloshim ad shnimtza madlik v'leil shmini shmonim. Notice the Rambam mentions nothing about a candelabrum, a menorah, and he certainly would use that bad word Hanukkah, which is very untraditional. Okay, he doesn't believe in such a thing. He never had such a thing. The traditional 8-branch menorah is a much later invention. It's not a halachic construct. So how to arrange the lamps in order, right to left, or left to right, and which way we light them. How many opinions exist, generally speaking, among those who usually talk about these things? 4 opinions, because 2 times 2 equals 4. There's 2 directions which you can light and 2 directions which you can set them. So there's an opinion for everything because none of this is Talmudic. So let's say the Rambam basically says if you're using candelabrum with this 10-member family, you'd have a 10-branch candelabrum the first night, and the second 10-branch candelabrum the second night, and a third 10-branch candelabrum the third night. Anybody do like the Rambam? No. And therefore, if you'd have a family of 5, you'd have 1 5-branch menorah the first night, 2 5-branch menorahs the second night, and so on. That's not what we are familiar with. That's how Rambam.
How about the Shamish?
What? The Shamish?
How about the Shamish?
So yeah, the Rambam doesn't talk about that. Okay? The Shamish also is a later invention because you don't want people using light to show that this is just for, you need one to show that this is the ones for purpose. The Shamish is for Shimush. So we added one. But the Shamish does not count. Okay? Let's see here. And then the Rambam says, Minat Pashut, Chol Arenu Bisparad. You know what they used to do in our cities in Spain? The Rambam, he lived in Spain for a while. He did not leave Spain with the Inquisition. That was 400 years later. Okay? But he did leave Spain because of reasons. So you call on Shebayit Malikim Ner Echad B'Layla Rishon U'Mosafim Lochim Ner B'Chol Layla V'Layla. They have the Spanish minhag, which is each one lights 1 candle the first night, and each one lights a second candle the second night, which is the standard practice. Okay. So my question over here, I put in English: what did Maimonides' menorah look like? Okay. So we decide that amongst yourselves. You could fight about this. What time do you light the candles? Well, so it's okay. So the Rambam says, "Ein malikin yerot Hanukkah kodem shetishkach hama ela im shkiata." The Rambam says we don't light the Hanukkah candles. Let's say before sunset, rather with sunset. The best time as the sun is setting. Okay? That's when ideally you should light it. The Vilna Gaon endorses this opinion, and this is the one that you get in the Halach. Because of the confusion with Rabbeinu Tam's opinion, Rabbeinu Tam redefined sunset. People started lighting the candles at Rabbeinu Tam's sunset, which is much later than actual sunset. And for a while, that's the way, for example, Shulchan Aruch held. Light the candles at sunset, but sunset is Rabbeinu Tam's sunset. We've gone back to not defining sunset like Rabbeinu Tam. So we should go back to lighting the candles then. But then they said, yeah, but it's closer to space. And you also have Ad Shetichle Regel Min Hashuk. You still have half an hour. There's a half an hour block. And nowadays, people are out on the street hours after this. So technically, it gives you a long time. But Rav Kapach didn't believe in that. You look what the Makbili points out here, and Rav Kapach brings. He says Makbili said something interesting, which is connected to what we were talking about before the break. Makbili says the time for lighting candles in Eretz Yisrael is basically at 4:40 in the afternoon. He knows when Shkia is every single day. Doesn't he have to look in the calendar? No, because around Hanukkah time, sunset is basically the same. All the time, all the days of the year when Hanukkah could fall out according to the Gregorian calendar, sunset is basically around 4:40. This year is one of the latest Hanukkahs every 19 years. This is the latest one. The last time Hanukkah was this late was also 19 years ago. It also started on the 25th of December. So really, sunset's closer going to be like at 4:43 or so. Fine, that's exceptional. So Makbili pointed out it's around 4:40. Makbili doesn't tell you what time sunset is in Erev Pesach. You know why? Like we said before, sunset Erev Pesach could be sometime late in March or even late in April, and there's a big difference on the clock. Also, if you're going to change your clock, you could start one Pesach at 6 p.m. and another Pesach at 7:30. Okay, so you just write that. Well. So what do? We'll get to that. Rav Kapach adds, why is the Rambam so strict with this? Because if you light it too early, it's not nikar at all. So you have to light the candle when people are actually noticing it, but before they actually want to use it. Sorry, you want to use the lamp. And that's the first half hour after sunset. So what do you do now? He asked a good question. The Rambam is very clear about this. The Zohar Gaon says, yeah, that's 100% the truth. You were supposed to light the Hanukkah candles at sundown. So two questions. What if you're at shul? Well, don't be at shul then. You should have davened mincha earlier. We just said the best time to daven mincha was actually when? Before sunset. You had a whole afternoon to daven mincha. You should have davened mincha at mincha ketana. And if you're Rabbi Yehuda, you should have davened it when? Before 4:45, or even when's fog now? Fog is like an hour before that. So you should have davened mincha sometime after 3. Really, that's what you should do. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to daven mincha early every single day of that on which there's candle lighting. Make sure to finish mincha significantly before sunset, so you can be at home at sunset. And when's Mariv? What do you mean? Mariv's 20 minutes after that. You want to daven Mariv after things. So that's what I've been doing since I made it to Eretz Yisrael. In America, we really didn't have a Hakkadah. We've been getting off early from high school. You go to Yeshiva University High School for boys. Sunset at Hanukkah time is what, 4:30? You're still in class. Oh, they let you out at 5 maybe. Early, 5 or 6. Still get home at 7. You're lighting Hanukkah candles. So we relied on the more lenient opinion. But in Eretz Yisrael, that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try davening mincha very early every day before candle lighting, and then go to a proper Mariv. A lot of shuls, they finish mincha right at sundown, and then they light the menorah in the shul, right? None of us really discharge our obligation through that. And then they daven Mariv right away, and then you get home, but it's now already 20 minutes after sunset, so you're losing this. I'm not here to convince anybody, although maybe you should try to convince people. So I know of a place where these Kabbalists, they have this idea. They light the candles maybe an hour or so after sunset. That's good because they do that right before they daven Mariv. So where I live, I could go to a mincha that will finish sometime before sunset, be outside always at around sunset for lighting Hanukkah candles, and an hour or so later head out to Mariv, and it works. Okay, so that's the Rambam there. And on Erev Shabbos, obviously you have to light sometime earlier, but even then, you don't have to. You have, as long as it's nikar, just like lighting Shabbos candles. Shabbos candles can't be too early, otherwise they don't count. It's not nikar there for Shabbos. So basically, at around the same time you're lighting Shabbos candles on Erev Shabbos, that's when you light your Hanukkah candles. Just make sure that there's enough fuel in there for them to go past the time. I've never seen people have a problem with this. You put enough oil in there, you're using even standard size tea lights. Those last for 3 hours. More than enough time. The Rambam continues, he talks about Hallel. The main mitzvah of Hanukkah is less about the candle lighting and more about the Hallel. How do I know that? Well, 2 reasons. Technically speaking, I can designate someone else to light the Hanukkah candles for me. Like the Rambam said, 1 candle for everybody in the house. The yeshiva dormitory has 50 students in there. They all chip in. 1 candle is enough for all of them. 1 guy lights. They don't even have to be in attendance there, right? They fulfill their obligation. But the mitzvah to thank God and to praise Him for the miracles is incumbent on everybody. You got to do that with your mouth, or at least hear someone saying it, Shomea Ka'oneh, and you respond with them. There has to be a responsive recitation of the Hallel, which is the main mitzvah of Hanukkah. Okay, that is the main mitzvah. Nafkamin would be if a person, missed Hanukkah candle lighting the first night. What happens? He cannot attend the lighting. He didn't see the candles. He was stuck working on the new underground train. And then he shows up in the morning, and it's time to daven Shachris on Hanukkah. Technically speaking, he has a Shech Yanu to be said on the mitzvah of Hallel. Okay? That's when he's saying it. Because that's the mitzvah of the holiday. So the Rambam, at this point in the book, was talking about all the different holidays. This is Sefer Zmanim. The Rambam talks about Shabbos and various holidays. When Rambam was talking about Pesach and Sukkot and the rest of them and Shavuos, he did not mention the mitzvah of Hallel. And he may have said it in passing in the laws of Tefillah, which was the previous book. Now he's going to go into the laws of Hallel. He included it in Hanukkah because that's the main mitzvah. V'chol yom v'yom mishmonat hayamim ha'elu gomerim et ha'halel. On all these 8 days of the holiday, they complete the Hallel. Why is it important? Because some days we don't complete the Hallel. Umvarech lefanau, baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'sivonu lichmor et ha'halel bein yachid bein tzibur. Whether it's a community or an individual. Community means with a minyan. Now, why is this significant that the Rambam says ligmor et ha'halel? Because our Sidurim don't say that, right? We have likro et ha'halel. Why do we have a different version of the bracha? Because sometimes we're saying the bracha even when we're not finishing the Hallel. That's a change. Even though this is a mitzvah, divrei sofrim, that's an expression meaning rabbinically ordained, there's no mitzvah in the Torah to say Hallel, we still have a bracha thereon. Why? Because we're commanded to listen to the sages. The Rambam says this, and the Chazal says this also regarding other rabbinic commandments, like Eruv, and everything we do on Purim, right? Reading the Megillah. Also, it's a mitzvah to listen to the sages. Why does the Rambam emphasize this? Why do the sages emphasize these brachos? Because for a few thousand years here and there, there's always a sect of Jews who are Jewish by birth, but they do not believe in rabbinic enactments, and they deny such things, right? So to strengthen this, the sages said, you say a bracha, it's as though God himself told us to do it. Nowadays, are there such Jews? Yes, there are such Jews. We call them Karaites. And the Karaites are really stuck. Do Karaites observe Purim? Technically speaking, yes. You know why? Because it's in the Bible. It's biblical. Do they do it exactly as we do? Well, technically, they do. Whatever it says in the Megillah to do, they do. They can't deny that. They're really stuck. They still have a machlokes between their poskim about how to relate to Hanukkah. Because it helps them too. Judaism survived and they believe in the temple and all that. But it is non-biblical and it's a rabbinic ordination. And they don't believe in the rabbis. They call us rabbinites because we believe in the rabbis. So they're really stuck what to do with Hanukkah because, it's right, but it's wrong. And this is just yet another internal contradiction in their whole way of thinking. So, God willing, God should put in their hearts to all return to the proper form of Judaism, which involves, a mechanism of rabbinic interpretation, what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh, and also legislation, the idea of a Sanhedrin Zakanim who decide these and other matters, and also get to make institutions. Okay? And the Rambam says, for example, there are certain times we don't say brachas, but there's a suffix, like demai. Anybody here ever have demai? Demai, what is that exactly? Okay? Demai means you're not quite sure if the fellow tithed the produce, so you got to tithe it yourself. Now, yes, there is nowadays demai. There's a lot of people, they don't know what they're doing with their produce. You'd have to take your own tithes, even your own truma out of it. Rambam says there's no brach on that. That's a suffix. What about Yontif Sheni? Isn't Yontif Sheni always a suffix? It's Sfeika Dioma, right? So when they have Yontif Sheni, how do you say brachas on it? How do you say Kiddush on the second night of Rosh Hashanah? The answer is, it says, Lama Varchin al Yom Tov Sheni, Vehem lo tiknu elam mipnei hasafek, Kedei shelo yizal zalubo. We still have in Chutz La'aretz, really, like the Gemara in Beitza says, we know what day is the 15th of Nisan. We know when the holiday of Passover happens. The fact that we keep the 16th also as though it's a Yom Tov, the first day of Pesach, again, is kind of iffy. They do a second Seder. See, so you go to Miami, for Pesach, you're going to have a second Seder. You can say, Brach on eating the matzah and the maror again. Right? How can you do it? You know what? You're 100% sure when the 15th of Nisan was. You shouldn't be eating the matzah this night. The answer is that you don't, decide to deride this rabbinic institution. You keep Yom Tov Sheni, so you say all the brachas. You do everything on Yom Tov Sheni exactly as you would do on Yom Tov Rishon. And then the Rambam continues and says, oh, by the way, now we're talking about Hallel. V'lo Hallel Hanukkah bilvad, not just the Hallel of Hanukkah. Hu shemi divrei sofrim, that's a rabbinic enactment. Elo kriyat Hallel l'olam divrei sofrim. Hallel, when we say it, let's say on other holidays, Sukkot, is also rabbinic enactment. Nechol yomim shegorim b'hen et Hallel. Any of these days when we finish the Hallel. Ushmonasar yom b'shana mitzvah ligmor b'hen et Hallel. There are actually 18 days a year, not just 8 days of Hanukkah. There's another 10 days. What are they? Shmonati me'echav, ushmonati me'chanukah, rishon shel Pesach, yom aseret. You have the 8 days of Sukkot, 8 days of Hanukkah, the first of Passover, the subsequent 6 days, all of Moed and the last Yom Tov, there's no Hallel technically, and Shavuos, that's Yom HaTzeret. Aval Rosh Hashanah Yom HaKippurim Ben Halel, Lefi Shehein Yemei Tshuva V'Yirav V'Pachad, your word on Yom Kippur, Em Asadim, so there is no Hallel in those days. V'lo tiknu Halel B'Purim, Shekriyat Megillah, Hi Ha Halel. Rambam has an important, great klal over here. Purim, technically speaking, is a day for Hallel. What does the sages say? Why don't we say the Hallel on Purim? No. Why don't they just say, default to regular Hallel? This Hallel covers Hanukkah and Passover and Sukkot and Shavuos. So just put Purim into there also. And so the sages said the Hallel that we're saying does not fit Purim. Why doesn't it fit Purim? All of these involve national independence. Akati Avdei Dachashverosh Anan. It starts with Hallelu Avdei Hashem, servants of God. You leave Egypt, now you serve God. You don't serve Pharaoh. Okay? So you can't do this. Purim does not celebrate the Jewish people leaving the exile. It just means that, the overseer let them smite their enemies. But he did not actually let them rebuild the temple, or he was even not encouraging Aliyah. They had to wait for his successors to get the temple completed. Right? So Achashverosh would be dead finally. So in that days, the sages instituted something else. We read the Megillah. Reading the Megillah is a form of Hallel, and you see it, they're actually parallel. Hallel is part of the Ksuvim. And we say a bracha before the recitation thereof, and a bracha afterwards. And there's a shliach tzibur. So too, the Megillah is part of the Ksuvim, and the shliach tzibur says a bracha on it before the recitation of the Megillah, and after the recitation of the Megillah. So it's a very similar act. It's like reading from the Navi. We just read a different section thereof. Okay? So it sort of fits. Which is why I remember Rabbi Avi told me that I can understand the institution of Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut, which fits. People are afraid of Yom HaAtzmaut, but it fits this model. If you hold like Rambam, he says, Chazal Malchus Yisrael, Yeser al Masayim Shana. So in similar circumstances, the Hallel HaMitzri would be appropriate. He said, really, it should have been that we would have produced a prophet who would have composed a new section of the Ksuvim. Okay? A new divinely inspired work upon which we would say a new blessing, and before and after the recitation thereof. But we haven't produced any prophets. Maybe we have, but they haven't shown up. To be a prophet, you have to be talking to God, you have to get messages from God, and you also have to get and go tell everybody. You can very much have a person who does communicate with the angels, but he's never told and share this with everybody. If he's not told that, he won't know. But, well, certainly not us. It's a good thing. It should be to our credit that we have a good nose for these things. Many people, since the time of our prophets, have arisen, even among the Jews, and claimed to be prophets, but we can actually see from what they're doing and their actions and the type of things they say that they must be false prophets. We're very good at finding those. There were actually quite a few times after the last Nevi'im died, the Jewish people were actually waiting. Like the Maccabees themselves were expecting a Navi to show up and guide them about cleansing the temple and rebuilding the altar. That wasn't a surprise. They were living just a century or two after the last prophet. In the times before Shmuel Navi, like we said last year, prophecy was very rare. In the times of the Shoftim, a prophet showed up once every 100 years or so with a message, and that was it. That was enough. So the fact that they went back to this circumstance where Nevi'im were rare, it didn't really mean much to them that there weren't any out and about prophets. And because I also say they expected certain people among them, even Tanaim, who were basically worthy of prophecy, and they even relate to them like they were prophets. They don't just call them that explicitly. Individuals such as, Nathan ben Uziel, who had a Ruach HaKodesh somehow, and he's the one who wrote the Targum on the Nevi'im. They treated him basically like a Navi. Or Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, or Shmuel Katan. Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol has stories about what he was speaking to God about in the Holy of Holies, right? That's basically a nevuah. It's just none of it's Ko Amar Hashem, go tell the people this and that, so we don't classify him with the Navi. But indeed, They were aware that certain people were certainly on this level, and no one had told Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, "What are you talking about? You're a navi. You spoke to God, and He asked you to pray, and you had visions, right? And you could say the Shem first, and you could understand what's going on in Shemayim. That's basically nevuah. He didn't claim I am a navi, but they did not doubt him for 1 minute because we expect to produce such exemplary individuals. When do we have to stop? You have to tell me, Mr. Dorf. Okay, fine. That's okay. Good. So the Rambam continues and says that there's Yontif Sheni. If you have Yontif Sheni, it means you're adding 3 days of Hallel. What 3 days? The second day of Passover, the second day of Shavuos, and the 9th day of Sukkot, what you and I call Simchas Torah and Chutz La'aretz. And then he says, on Rosh Chodesh, Hallel is just a minhag. It's not a mitzvah. U'minhag zeh b'tzibur, lefichach korim b'dilu. Because Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, and also on the subsequent days of Pesach, is just a minhag. It's not a mitzvah. There is no mitzvah. The sages say Hallel on those days. We actually skip parts of the service. Ve'ein mevarachin alav, she'ein mevarachin al haminhag, v'yachid lo yikra klal. The Rambam says you have Hallel Rosh Chodesh, no bracha. It's just a minhag. You don't say a bracha on a minhag, although this sort of contradicts what Rambam just said with regard to the Yom He says no, that you don't have people won't scorn the holiday. And then he says an individual shouldn't say Hallel at all on Rosh Chodesh. He has to make sure he's b'tzibur. Yeah, do you do that? No. Rambam is telling the Maimonides opinion. We're going to follow the Torah and the Golden Gaon here. And he says, but if you start saying Hallel, yashli b'didu kederech shekrim b'tzibur. Okay. If he started so he can finish, but do it Hallel Rosh Chodesh style, leave parts out. And he says the same thing with the last days of Pesach. Now, I have here what the Vilna Gaon writes on Orach Chaim Tuf Kuf Bet. The Vilna Gaon is defending the standard Ashkenazic practice, which allows for a blessing to be said before the Hallel, even on Rosh Chodesh and the last days of Pesach. What are the arguments here? So I highlighted it. In the Vilna Gaon there, you have that I translated the main argument into English, okay? Because the Vilna Gaon writes in the Torah that we couldn't put into the text over here, so I'll read it to you, the English section. There, elsewhere in the Gemara, the post can discuss interrupting the half Hallel by speaking. What does it mean, interruption? Someone comes over to you and says, hello, or needs to ask you a question. So you speak in the middle of your half Hallel, right? It's an issue. Now, if we did not recite any blessing on, let's say, Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, why is there even a question about interrupting this recitation? You're just saying Tehillim. You didn't say a bracha beforehand. You're not going to say a bracha afterwards. There is no issue of interruptions. The fact that the sages and others discuss this issue of interruption means that even when we're saying this half Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, we've recited a blessing to begin it. The second argument is that the history of this minhag is actually kind of interesting. It was not an Eretz Yisrael minhag. Rav, who I mentioned before, his name in Aramaic was Abba Rifa, which is the Aramaic equivalent of the name Avi Grossman, which is Yiddish. Okay, so yeah, true. It's a Jewish name keeps coming up again. How many David Goldbergs are around here? So he went to Bavel. What was he doing in Eretz Yisrael? He was a student of Rabbi Donasi, who passed away in, I think, the early 3rd century, if I'm not mistaken, or late 2nd century. Rav came to Bavel and discovered that the Babylonians had their own minhagim. And one of those was they're reciting Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. And he was scandalized by it and he thought that he should stop them. But then he heard that what? Oh, there's somebody who skipped a section. They're not really saying Hallel. They're skipping parts. He realized, okay, fine. This is legitimate. This also points out that Rav was used to such an idea. It means that the half Hallel on Pesach already existed. Okay? So he just said, oh, they're doing what they do on Passover. This isn't the real mitzvah. I'll let them continue with their quasi-Hallel recitation on Rosh Chodesh. Now notice, the Tosfos point this out first. The Vilna Gaon is not the first one to make this argument. Rav only realized that what we were doing was legitimate when they started skipping sections, which means from the outset he was a little bit scandalized. It must have been also that they had started the Hallel with a bracha, because if they had left off the bracha, he already would have been scandalized. It would just have been, Tehillim without a bracha beforehand. And by the time they start skipping, he's just like, oh yeah, that's why they're skipping, because they didn't say the bracha. But they did say the bracha apparently, and that's why he only realized that something's okay when they got to the skipping part, which is a few paragraphs in. And the last argument is that when we have a minhag to keep a mitzvah, just like Yom Tov Sheni, so there's also a blessing said thereon. And the Don gives examples over here, okay, that you have. Our minhag is to keep this mitzvah. This is, I think it's Rabbi Tom's argument, okay, and others. So even so, we say a bracha. We have a minhag to do the mitzvah of recitation of Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, and therefore we say a bracha thereon. And this is actually, of course, you know this as the standard Ashkenazic practice. There are people Ashkenazim who also hold this way, not like the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch holds like the Rambam. So you go to your other Sparta schools around here at all. Have you been to a Sparta shul on Rosh Chodesh? They just run right into the Hallel. They just say Hallelujah and you go into it. No bracha before, no bracha afterwards. So let's say, well, no, they just don't say any bracha. If it's Passover or Rosh Chodesh, no bracha before after. Okay? Yeah, we saw already because it's complete Hallel. We say the Kroat Hallel because our bracha covers complete Hallel and incomplete Hallel. This is also the argument they made after talking with Rabbi Rabinovich. We realized that if you have a day, let's say, new Israeli Independence Day, Rabbi Rabinovich, of blessed memory, of Nachum. Yeah. Yeah. He was in Canada, he was in England, and he was in Ma'ale Adumim. And it turns out that, well, Rabbi Sachs and others. He has a lot of Talmidim and Talking in there as well, who are Rabbi Sabato and the rest of them, and his son. So Rabbi Rabinovich was very insistent. You say Hallel on. Yes. So what do they have? They say Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. What do we do on Rosh Chodesh? It is not a mitzvah. Technically speaking, there's no real reason to say Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. Yet, even though we're saying half Hallel, we say a blessing. There's some people, for whatever reason, were uncomfortable with Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut. They didn't feel confident, even though they know it's the right thing, saying a full Hallel with the bracha like the Rabbanut said. So what they do? They said, say half Hallel. Don't say the bracha. Say the Hallel after davening, like tack it on after chakras. Say half Hallel. Don't say the bracha. Now it's technically speaking, we're safe. We're not doing anything that's inappropriate if we are wrong in doing this. But that's not correct. Why? Because Ashkenazic practice for at least 1,000 years has been, even on Rosh Chodesh, when you have no actual historical reason to say Hallel, and you're saying only half Hallel, you say it with the bracha. According to the Vilna Gaon, there is no circumstance when our tradition allows for Hallel without a bracha. Even when you have no reason to say Hallel, and you're saying just a half Hallel, you still say it as part of the chakras and with the bracha. So if you're a little bit uncomfortable, you're not confident about Hallel on those days, but you know there is something to it, so it shouldn't be any worse than the Kodesh when you have no historical reason to say Hallel. So I can understand why they're not going to complete the Hallel, but it doesn't make sense to remove Hallel from chakras or to emit. 4 minutes, let's see the Rambam. The Rambam says here also a piece that's historically interesting. What do we omit from our Hallel on Rosh Chodesh or the last years of Pesach? Not 2 whole Tehillim. We cut off the beginnings of 2 of the Mizmorim. Okay? The first few psukim of Lolanu Hashem and the other one, they leave it off. Okay, that makes sense. What does the Rambam say? By the way, it's not Ma'ino Mayim. The ayin is a consonant, and the yud is a shvana. So it's ma'ino. How do you pronounce an ayin? Like an ayin. That's the way it is. It's a consonant. The ma'ino Mayim. It's not silent. And then you skip the deleg lomer Hashem zicharanu yivarech. It also is not whatever. We get into the trouble of that one, but it's not for here. So that skip the part that we're familiar with, and then he says ad haluluka. Okay, fine. That's the end of Mizmor Kuf Tes Vav. Umidaleg lomer ma'ashiv Hashem from Anachnu Varech Yah Me'atav Olam Hallelujah until the part that means ma'ashiv. Okay, ad, and then he says until the end of that Mizmor. Umidaleg lomer min ametzar karati Hashem. The parts also that begin with the Hodus, the response of Hodu Hashem, Yomar No Yisrael, the Rambam also leaves that out. Do we leave that out? No. So there's some people, I think the Yemenites and Nusach Eretz Yisrael leave this part out on Rosh Chodesh. We don't. Ad Sof Alel, V'zehu Aminat HaPashut, V'yesh Midalgin Zilug Acher. When the Rambam says this isn't the minhag pashut, it doesn't mean the simple minhag. It means it's the common one that is spread throughout the Jewish people. But there are other ways of skipping around. The Rambam acknowledges that. He also says that the entire day is kosher for Kriyas Halel. My nafkamina, like we just saw before with Muslim. You miss Halel as part of Shacharis, and you have an obligation to recite Halel, so you have an obligation to recite Halel. Nowadays, Rav Cyril didn't really appreciate this, but it's become the practice that we have minyanim with an oven, right? There's an oven in town, so they just let him daven at home. That wasn't the old practice. Used to be they only have such a thing, gathered together a minyan in the home of the deceased, when the deceased has no relatives who are sitting shiva. But nowadays, every oven is given this privilege that they just bring the shul to him. So what do you do on Hanukkah? A person sits shiva on Hanukkah. The other holidays, there is no such thing as shiva, so there's no conflict. But on Hanukkah, everybody in the room is obligated to say Hallel. So indeed, the usual practice was, even the Shiva house was saying Hallel on Hanukkah. But what if it's just Rosh Chodesh? That's not a mitzvah. The other is not going to be wanting to say Hallel. Some say, well, it's a minhag, universal minhag. They'll have to say Hallel to everybody else. But in other places, like in America, they omit the Hallel on Rosh Chodesh in the other's house. So what do the rest of the people do? So they have no obligation. If they leave, if they didn't say it, they didn't say it. But some would I guess, tweet it sometime afterwards. What? Yeah, sometimes you do that. That's not nice. The ovel's already in the oven. Now you're in his living room, and now you're kicking him out of his living room from his own shiva house. Okay. The basic practice was, by the way, that the ovel goes to shul like everybody else, not just on Shabbos. An ovel is given this thing. It doesn't go out to work, but the ovel is supposed to go to shul, and he just does what everybody else does to shul. This is not a matter of halachah. The Rambam's not going to bring this up. What does an ovel do? There's just different minhagim developed over this. So he says that you have to say Hallel all day, and we can skip to the next one, next halacha here. He says there's an after bracha. Mokom shenagul levarich acharav mevarech. The Rambam doesn't say there's a required bracha after the recitation of Hallel. Just like after the Megillah, by the way. The bracha after the Megillah itself is not as clear as the brachas before the Megillah. So too, even the Rambam says you have complete Hallel, there's only some places have this minhag to say the after bracha, which is the one that he brought over here, okay? Which is similar to the one we have in our Sidurim. So once again, the Rambam doesn't have it universally. Nowadays, I could see, maybe don't tell me if I'm wrong, in places where they're saying the bracha before Hallel, whether half Hallel or whole Hallel, they also have this after bracha, and we're familiar with that. And he mentions here that they double over certain psukim. Why they do that? That's because they used to be responsive. Some places they don't repeat certain psukim. Why do we pick these psukim? Apparently there's precedent from temple times. And the Rambam also says here, saying to the found of the Gemara, what's the correct way, the old minhag to say Hallel? Not the way we do so now in the synagogue, but rather by inserting the word Hallelujah after every phrase. Each pasuk basically divides into 2 or 3 phrases. Okay? The vast majority of psukim in the Hallel that we have basically divide into 2. There's an etnach in the middle of the pasuk. Some psukim like Hashem Zefarani Varech and Ana Hashem Yani Avdecha, Ani Avdecha Ben Amethecha, etc. Those are actually longer. They have more than 2 sections. So the Rambam says here, how do you do this? Achar shemivarech hagadol shemakreet hallel. After the gadol who's reading Hallel for everybody else, after someone who's has shoulders, who's leading the recitation, Marchil v'omer Hallelujah, v'chol ha'amonim Hallelujah. Notice 2 words. Machlokas, what should be written here to him? 1 word or 2 words? V'chozer v'omer Hallelu Avdei Hashem, v'chol ha'amonim Hallelujah. He says a phrase, they say Hallelujah. He says a phrase, they say Hallelujah. How much time would this take? A while. That's the way the Rambam says. The Chazer Omer Hallelujah Shem Hashem. The Chol Ha'amonim Hallelujah. Has anybody ever seen this done? No. Yeah, I've never seen it. Okay, and sometimes they just repeat what he said if it's the beginning of a paragraph. It ends up being, I put this in bold, that you're going to say Hallelujah Me'ah v'shalosh v'asrim pamim. Okay, 123 times. How do you remember that mnemonic? That's how long Aaron lived. He lived to the age of 123. And he continues, hold on. Oh, it just jumped. What happened here? Not on the screen. The Rambam, what does he say about this this minhag? He says at the end, he says again at the beginning of every perek, and where they repeat what he said. I want to read the last line. Over here in bold. Skip to that, at the very end. V'zehu haminhag harishon uvo ra'ui leilei. This is the original minhag, how you say Hallel. All these responses. And that's what you're supposed to do. But aval bizmanim elu, nowadays, ra'iti b'chol mikomot, minhagot mishunot, b'kriyato uva'niyat ha'am. I've seen all sorts of minhagim mishunot, weird minhagim. Who says what, how the people answer, what they do. Ve'ein echad mehem domeh la'acher. There's no two minhagim about how it goes. So when you say that even Ashkenazim, they have different ways of responding, Hodus and Halus and Yom Munaf used to be, and then our school published, here's how to do it, and then that basically steamrolled all the organic minhagim that were in other places and stopped doing that. Okay, that's our conclusion. Thank you all very much. Close the prayer. We see, just like we had Hanukkah then, we should have Hanukkah now.